For 28 years, I believed family meant unconditional love. Then last Thanksgiving, I walked into our family dinner to find a financial advisor waiting with legal documents and my father's cold declaration, "You're no longer part of this family." They had planned it all, the ambush, the disinheritance, the complete erasure of my existence. What they hadn't planned for was the secret I'd been keeping, a truth that would shatter the perfect family facade they'd crafted and expose. Decades of lies. They thought cutting me out would be simple. They had no idea what I was about to reveal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thanksgiving was always sacred in the Williams household, not because we were particularly religious or traditional, but because it was the one day my father, Marcus, demanded perfection. Mom would spend days preparing the turkey to his specifications. My older sister Diana would fly in from wherever her corporate job had taken her that year. My younger brother Trevor would temporarily abandon his perpetual rebellion. And I, Olivia, would meticulously set the table with the heirloom china that had belonged to my grandmother. The preparations would begin weeks in advance. Dad would select the wine with painstaking deliberation. Mom would rehearse new recipes, testing them on weeknights to ensure they met his standards. Diana would send regular updates about her arrival time, accompanied by dietary restrictions that changed yearly based on whatever cleanse or wellness trend she was following. Trevor would promise to be on his best behavior, which meant no visible tattoos and no mentions of his struggling band, and I would coordinate it all. The group texts, the shopping lists, the schedule that ensured everyone arrived at precisely the right time, not too early to inconvenience Mom, not too late to irritate Dad. I was the family glue, the mediator, the one who smoothed, ruffled feathers and ensured the day proceeded according to the Williams family tradition. For 28 years, I played my role in this carefully choreographed family performance. The quiet, dependable middle child, the one who stayed in our hometown of Ridgemont after college, the one who visited every Sunday for dinner, the one who drove Mom to her doctor's appointments and helped Dad with the yard work when his back started giving him trouble. Family is everything, Dad would proclaim each Thanksgiving, raising his glass in a toast that felt more like a commandment. When everything else fails, blood remains. We'd all nod solemnly, even Diana, who had built her life 1,000 miles away, and Trevor, who rolled his eyes when Dad wasn't looking. I believed it. I organized my entire life around that belief. I declined a job offer in Seattle to stay close. I ended a relationship with someone I loved because he wanted to move to Colorado. I bought a small house just 15 minutes from my parents because proximity to family was non-negotiable. Every Sunday dinner followed the same script. Dad dominated. The conversation with stories about his insurance business. Mom quietly refilled glasses and offered seconds. Diana, when she called in, spoke of promotions and networking opportunities. Trevor shared carefully edited versions of his life, omitting anything that might trigger Dad's disapproval. And I listened, supported, validated, playing my assigned role of the good daughter. This wasn't just my family. It was my identity. When colleagues invited me to weekend trips, I declined because Sunday was family dinner. When friends set me up on blind dates, I evaluated potential partners based on how well they'd fit into the Williams dynamic. When I considered career moves, my first thought was always how it would affect my availability for family obligations. There were moments, brief and quickly suppressed, when I questioned this arrangement. Like when Dad berated Mom for overcooking. The roast. His voice sharp enough to make her hands tremble as she cleared the plates. Or when he dismissed Trevor's music as a hobby he needed to grow out of, prompting my brother's habitual retreat to the porch with a cigarette and a slammed door. But these were just family dynamics, I told myself. Every family had tension. Every family had roles and expectations. And despite the occasional discomfort, the Williams family functioned. We gathered for holidays. We celebrated birthdays. We appeared in Christmas card photos wearing coordinated outfits, smiling our practiced smiles. Blood is thicker than water, Dad would remind us whenever conflicts arose. In the Williams household, family loyalty was paramount. Unquestioning, absolute. And I was the most loyal of all, the keeper of peace, the repository of family history, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who coordinated gifts and gatherings, who preserved the illusion that we were exactly what we appeared to be. A close-knit, loving family bound by unbreakable ties. I never told them about Haley, about how we met at a community garden workshop 2 years ago, our hands brushing as we reached for the same packet of heirloom tomato seeds. About how her laugh made something unfurl inside me, something that had been tightly coiled for as long as I could remember. About how, for the first time, I understood what it meant to be fully seen, fully accepted. In my family's narrative, I was simply focused on my career as an elementary school librarian, too busy for serious relationships, married to my job and family responsibilities. It was easier that way, safer. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment to introduce them to the truth, that I needed to prepare them gradually, that keeping Haley separate from the Williams family dynamic was temporary, but the longer I waited, the more complicated the deception became. Haley became my roommate when Mom called while she was at my house. Weekend trips with her were described as professional development conferences. The photos on my mantle were hidden when family visited, replaced with neutral landscapes and childhood memories that fit the approved narrative. That was the reality I had constructed. That was the truth I thought we all shared. That family meant acceptance without conditions. That my place in the Williams household was secure. That the sacrifices I'd made, of authenticity, of independence, of personal fulfillment, were investments in something permanent and unbreakable. I never imagined that a single Thanksgiving day would shatter that reality beyond recognition, or that the family I'd organized my life around would discard me without hesitation, or that the secret I'd kept to protect them would become my only protection against their betrayal. The first hint that something had shifted came 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I was at work, shelving books in the elementary school library, when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. It wasn't unusual to hear from her. We typically exchanged messages daily, but the content struck me as odd. Need to talk about Thanksgiving. Dad's making changes this year. Changes. In the Williams family, change was practically a forbidden concept, especially when it came to holidays. Dad insisted on tradition, on predictability. The idea that he was initiating alterations to our sacred Thanksgiving ritual was like hearing the Pope had decided to skip Christmas. I called Mom during my lunch break, expecting some minor adjustment, perhaps a different brand of cranberry, sauce, or a new tablecloth. "What changes?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Your father wants to have dinner at 4 instead of 2, she said, her voice carrying that slightly strained quality it took on whenever she was relaying Dad's decisions, rather than her own preferences. "And he's thinking of inviting the Fosters." The Fosters were Dad's new clients, a couple who had recently moved to town and opened an investment firm. Dad had mentioned them at Sunday dinner a few times, always with an unusual degree of enthusiasm. Something about their connections, their polish, their potential to bring him business. "That's different," I said carefully. "What about Diana? She always books her flight around our usual time." A pause. "She's handled it. She and your father have already spoken." Already spoken? Without the group chat? Without my coordination? I felt a small twinge of unease, quickly dismissed as ridiculous. So Diana and Dad had a private conversation. So what? "Oh, and Olivia," Mom continued. "Dad says to wear something professional. You know how he gets with new people." The request stung more than it should have. I'd worn the same autumn-colored sweater dress to Thanksgiving for 3 years running. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dad had never commented on it before. Now, suddenly, my librarian chic wasn't good enough for the precious Fosters? Sure, I said, swallowing my irritation. I'll find something. That night, I called Diana, expecting our usual pre-Thanksgiving strategy session. How to manage Dad's moods, which topics to avoid, a review of recent family landmines. But she sounded distracted, almost impatient. Can't talk long, she said, the sound of keyboard clicks in the background. Deadline. I just wanted to check about Thanksgiving. Mom mentioned the time change. Right, Dad called me last week. No problem. I adjusted my flight. Last week? And no one had thought to include me in this conversation? He also mentioned the Fosters coming, I ventured. Yeah, they sound important. Dad says they could really help with his expansion plans. Expansion plans? What expansion plans? Diana's sigh was audible. Olivia, we literally talked about this 2 Sundays ago. Dad's looking to open a second office. The Fosters have connections in the commercial real estate market. But we hadn't talked about it. At least not with me present. I would have remembered something as significant as Dad expanding his business. I'd been at every Sunday dinner, attentive as always. Had they discussed this before I arrived? After? I left? Right, of course. I lied, not wanting to reveal my exclusion. Just making sure we're all on the same page. We are. Look, I've got to run. We'll catch up at Thanksgiving. She hung up before I could say goodbye, leaving me staring at my phone, that initial twinge of unease spreading into something more substantial. The next warning came a week later. I stopped by my parents' house on a Wednesday evening, as I often did midweek, to drop off some library books Mom had requested. As I approached the door, I heard voices from inside, animated, laughing, glasses clinking. A dinner party? I hesitated, then rang the doorbell instead of using my key. Dad answered, his expression shifting from warm welcome to something more guarded when he saw me. Olivia. Didn't expect you tonight. Behind him, I glimpsed a dining table set for 6. Wine bottles open, candles lit. The good china, my grandmother's china, laid out precisely as I would have arranged it. Sorry to interrupt, I said, holding out the canvas bag of books. Just dropping these off for Mom. Thanks. He took the bag but didn't invite me in. Over his shoulder, I could see Diana, who supposedly wasn't flying in until Thanksgiving, seated at the table beside a man I didn't recognize. Trevor was there too, along with a woman with a pixie cut who had her hand comfortably on his arm. Is that Diana? I asked, unable to keep the confusion from my voice. Dad glanced back. She had a conference in the city, decided to extend her stay through Thanksgiving. Surprise visit. His tone made it clear it had been a surprise for everyone but me. And Trevor has a guest, I observed. Vanessa, Dad said shortly. His girlfriend. Going on 5 months now. 5 months? Trevor and I had coffee every week. He'd never once mentioned a girlfriend, let alone someone serious enough to bring to a family dinner. Well, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. Don't let me interrupt. Just wanted to drop off Mom's books. Appreciate it. We'll see you Sunday. The door closed. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the muffled laughter resume. Inside before walking back to my car. 5 months Trevor had been seeing someone, and he hadn't told me. Diana was in town early, and no one had thought to mention it. A dinner party with my grandmother's china, the china I always carefully washed and put away after family gatherings, and I hadn't even been invited. These could all be innocent coincidences, I told myself as I drove home. People get busy. Communications get missed. But a cold, rational voice in the back of my mind whispered that there were too many coincidences piling up, too many exclusions happening in too short a time. That night, I called Haley, who was visiting her parents in Michigan for the week. Am I being paranoid? I asked after explaining the situation. Or is something weird happening with my family? Honestly? Haley's voice was gentle but firm. It sounds like they're creating distance. Have you considered that they might know about us? The thought had occurred to me, but I'd dismissed it as impossible. We'd been so careful, so discreet. Unless my birthday dinner, I said suddenly. 2 months ago, you came as my roommate, but you helped me blow out the candles. And when we were in the kitchen getting cake plates, you tucked my hair behind my ear. It had been such a small gesture, so automatic and affectionate. But Dad had walked in right at that moment, looking for the good knife to cut the cake. He hadn't said anything, had barely seemed to notice. But what if he had? Maybe, Haley said. Or maybe someone saw us together in town. Or maybe they found your Instagram. My private Instagram, where I occasionally posted photos of us together. Not overtly romantic, but affectionate enough that a suspicious observer might draw conclusions. I should just tell them, I said, not for the first time. Before Thanksgiving. Clear the air. If that's what you want, Haley replied, her tone carefully neutral. We'd had this conversation before. She was ready for me to come out to my family. Had been ready for months. But she wouldn't push, understanding the complicated dynamics at play. I'll think about it, I promised. But as the days passed and Thanksgiving approached, the right moment never seemed to materialize. Trevor was suddenly busy, canceling our coffee date for the first time in years. Mom was distracted during our phone calls, rushing to end conversations. Dad sent a group text about Thanksgiving. Preparations, addressed to Diana and Trevor, with me added almost as an afterthought. Diana and Trevor, and Olivia. Thanksgiving details finalized. Dinner at 4. Business casual attire. Important guests joining. Trevor, bring wine. Diana, handling dessert. Olivia, just bring yourself. Just bring yourself. After years of coordinating, menus of bringing multiple dishes, of setting the table and managing the flow of the day, I had been reduced to a guest at my own family tradition. Something was definitely wrong. And I was beginning to suspect it had everything to do with what I'd been hiding. Thanksgiving Day dawned bright and cold, the kind of crisp November morning that usually filled me with anticipation. I'd spent the previous evening selecting my outfit, a charcoal gray dress with a tailored blazer, professional enough for Dad's mysterious guests, but still festive enough for a family holiday. I'd even splurged on having my hair blown out, something I rarely bothered with. You look beautiful, Haley had said during our morning video call, her face soft with concern. Call me after, okay? No matter what time. I'd nodded, stomach too knotted to say much. Despite the mounting evidence that something was off, part of me still believed this would be like any other Thanksgiving. Tense in moments, but ultimately affirming of our place in each other's lives. The Williams family was flawed, but we were still family. That meant something. It had to. I arrived at precisely 3:45, clutching a bottle of wine I'd purchased despite Dad's instructions to bring only myself. Old habits. The driveway was full, Diana's rental car, Trevor's Jeep, and 2 unfamiliar vehicles that must belong to the Fosters and Vanessa. I parked on the street and walked up the familiar path to the house where I'd spent my childhood, straightening my blazer and taking a deep breath. The door opened before I could knock. Dad stood there, dressed in a suit I'd never seen before, his expression unreadable. Right on time, he said, stepping aside to let me in. No hug, no warm greeting. Just an assessment of my punctuality. The house smelled different, pine and cinnamon, rather than Mom's usual vanilla candles. The furniture in the living room had been rearranged, creating a more formal seating area than our usual casual arrangement. And there, already seated with drinks in hand, were Trevor, Vanessa, Diana, An older couple who must be the Fosters, and a man in his 50s wearing an expensive-looking suit and horn-rimmed glasses. No sign of Mom. "Everyone," Dad announced, gesturing toward me without warmth. "My daughter Olivia has arrived." A chorus of polite hellos followed, but no one rose to greet me. Trevor avoided my eyes, suddenly fascinated by the ice in his glass. Diana offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The Fosters," Dad continued, indicating the older couple, "and Mr. Kyle Atkinson, our financial advisor." Financial advisor? Since when did my frugal, self-sufficient father consult a financial advisor? And why would he invite this man to our family Thanksgiving? "Pleasure," I said automatically, moving to set my wine on the side table. "Where's Mom?" "Finishing up in the kitchen," Dad replied. "She'll join us shortly. Have a seat, Olivia. We need to talk before dinner." I felt it then. The subtle shift in atmosphere. The watchful stillness that descended on the room. Everyone was looking at me with expressions ranging from curiosity, the Fosters, to discomfort, Trevor, to something that looked unsettlingly like satisfaction, Diana. I sat in the only empty chair, a straight-backed dining chair that had been brought in from the other room, clearly an afterthought to the seating arrangement. It was positioned slightly apart from the conversational circle, as if I were an observer rather than a participant. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why is your financial advisor here on Thanksgiving?" Dad cleared his throat. "Kyle is here in a professional capacity. We have some family business to discuss." "On Thanksgiving?" I repeated, unable to keep the incredulity from my voice. "It seemed efficient," Diana interjected. "Since we're all together anyway." "Except we're not all together," I pointed out. "Mom's not here." As if on cue, Mom appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of appetizers. She looked thinner than I remembered, her hands slightly unsteady as she set the tray down. "Olivia," she said softly, "you came." "Of course I came," I replied, confused. "It's Thanksgiving." Mom didn't meet my eyes as she took a seat next to Dad, who immediately placed a proprietary hand on her knee. The gesture seemed possessive rather than affectionate. "Let's get to the point," Dad said. "Your mother and I have been making some changes, planning for the future. Kyle has been helping us reorganize our estate." "Okay," I said slowly. "And this concerns all of us because we're updating our will and trust documents," Dad continued. "Diana will be taking over as executor, given her business experience. The house will be sold when we relocate to Florida next year, with the proceeds divided between her and Trevor." I waited for him to continue, to mention my portion, but he simply reached for his drink, avoiding my gaze. "And me?" I finally asked, the words feeling thick in my throat. Dad set his glass down with deliberate care. "That's what we need to discuss today. Your mother and I have decided that, given your lifestyle choices, you will not be included in the estate planning going forward." The room went deadly quiet. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. "My lifestyle choices," I repeated, the words hollow. "We know." "About your roommate," Diana said, making air quotes around the last word. "Haley, is it? Mom and Dad know she's not just sharing your rent." I felt the blood drain from my face. They knew, they all knew, and they'd gathered here, with witnesses, to formally cut me out. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "Does it matter?" Dad replied. "What matters is that you've been living a lie, deceiving this family, going against everything we stand for." "And what do we stand for exactly?" I asked, genuine curiosity mixing with the hurt and anger rising in my chest. "Decency," Dad snapped. "Traditional values. Honesty." The irony of Him citing honesty while ambushing me in front of strangers was not lost on me. I looked at Mom, hoping for some sign of support, but she was staring fixedly at her hands, twisted tightly in her lap. So because I'm gay, I'm out? Just like that? 28 years of being your daughter? Erased because of who I love? Don't be dramatic, Olivia, Diana sighed. No one's erasing you. We're simply adjusting the family's financial arrangements to align with Dad and Mom's values, which apparently don't include me anymore, I said. That was your choice, Dad replied coldly. Mr. Atkinson, the financial advisor, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps I should step out while the family discusses. No need, Dad interrupted. We've discussed everything already. We just need Olivia to sign the papers acknowledging her removal from the will and trust. Sign papers? I echoed, disbelieving. Today? On Thanksgiving? No time like the present, Dad said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Clean break? Then we can all enjoy our dinner. I looked around the room, at Trevor's guilty discomfort, at Diana's cool detachment, at Mom's defeated posture, at the strangers watching this family implosion with the awkward fascination of rubberneckers at a car crash. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, I knew this wasn't a spontaneous decision. This had been planned, coordinated, discussed extensively without me. The strange behaviors, the secret meetings, Diana's early arrival, Trevor's mysterious girlfriend, the missing dinner invitations, it had all been leading to this ambush. Before I sign anything, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded, there's something you should know. A secret I've been keeping much longer than Haley. What secret? Dad demanded, his expression shifting from smug certainty to wariness. The room went still. Even the Fosters, who'd been pretending polite interest in their drinks, looked up. Mom's hands trembled slightly around her untouched wine glass. Diana's eyes narrowed, calculating potential threats to the plan they'd so carefully orchestrated. I took a deep breath. In that crystalline moment of clarity, I knew I had a choice. I could unleash the information I'd been holding about grandfather's trust, about the separate inheritance that Dad couldn't touch. I could watch their faces as they realized their perfect ambush had a fatal flaw. But looking at them, these people who had planned my excommunication with the precision of a military operation, I understood something else. This wasn't about money. Not really. This was about control, about conformity, about maintaining the illusion of the perfect Williams family at all costs, even if that cost was discarding a child. My secret, I said slowly, standing up, is that I've been lying to myself for years, pretending that this family loved me unconditionally, that all the sacrifices I made, staying close, organizing every holiday, being available whenever any of you needed anything, would somehow earn me the right to exist as myself. Dad's face darkened. Sit down, Olivia. This is exactly the kind of dramatic scene we wanted to avoid. I'm sure you did, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm, inside me. Easier to cut someone out when they go quietly, isn't it? When they're too shocked or hurt to defend themselves? We're not cutting you out, Mom said, speaking for the first time, her voice thin. We just want you to reconsider your choices. My choices? I laughed, a hollow sound. Like the choice to hide who I am for years because I knew this would happen? Or the choice to turn down dream jobs and relationships to stay close to a family that was planning my exclusion over dinner parties I wasn't invited to? Trevor flinched visibly. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Trevor? Explain to me how my own brother, who I have coffee with every week, who tells me everything, somehow forgot to mention he's been in a serious relationship for 5 months. Explain how you all had dinner without me last week, using the china I always carefully wash and put away after our family gatherings. Explain how this... I gestured around the room, at the legal documents, the financial advisor, the assembled witnesses. Isn't exactly what it looks like. No one spoke. The Fosters looked like they wanted to sink into the floor. Mr. Atkinson was suddenly very interested in his cufflinks. "I think," Vanessa said quietly, speaking for the first time, "that Trevor and I should wait in the other room." She tugged gently at Trevor's arm. He followed her without protest, too cowardly to meet my eyes as they left. "I'll sign your papers," I said when they'd gone, turning back to Dad. "I'll remove myself from whatever legal documents you've prepared, but not because you've strong-armed me into it. Because I don't want anything from people who can discard a daughter this easily." Dad's jaw tightened. "You're making a scene." "No, you made the scene," I replied. "You arranged it, cast it, set the stage. I'm just refusing to read the script you prepared for me." I picked up my purse, the movement calm despite the earthquake happening inside me. "I won't be staying for dinner. Enjoy your turkey and your righteousness." I walked out, ignoring Dad's sharp command to come back, ignoring Diana's eye roll, ignoring Mom's whispered, "Olivia, please." The November air hit my face like a slap, but it felt cleaner, more honest than the atmosphere inside that house. In my car, I sat motionless, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I'd known, intellectually, that coming out might change my relationship with my family. But I'd never imagined this. This calculated cruelty, this public humiliation, this complete rejection of not just my sexuality, but my very existence as their daughter and sister. I drove in a daze, not consciously choosing a destination until I found myself parked outside Zoe's apartment building. Zoe, my oldest friend, who had been telling me for years that my family took advantage of me. Zoe, who understood complicated families, having navigated her own parents' messy divorce. Zoe, who answered the door in sweatpants and an apron, took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug without a word. "They know about Haley," I whispered into her shoulder. They disowned me. On Thanksgiving." "Those absolute monsters," Zoe breathed, pulling me inside. "Tell me everything." I collapsed on her couch, the adrenaline of the confrontation draining away, leaving me hollow and shaky. As I recounted every excruciating detail, Zoe's expression shifted from shock to outrage to a simmering anger I rarely saw in my gentle friend. "They had a financial advisor there? On Thanksgiving? With paperwork ready?" she repeated, incredulous. "Olivia, that's sociopathic. They planned this whole thing as a public humiliation." "But why?" I asked, the question that had been circling in my mind since I walked out. "Why not just tell me privately? Why the audience, the formal setting, the legal documents?" "Because it wasn't just about cutting you out," Zoe said, her voice hardening. "It was about making you feel powerless, making sure you couldn't argue or fight back. They wanted witnesses to your exclusion, like some twisted public ceremony." The raw truth of her words settled in my chest, heavy and cold. This hadn't been a spontaneous reaction to discovering my sexuality. This had been methodical, planned, discussed. They had coordinated schedules, invited witnesses, prepared legal documents. They had orchestrated my removal from the family with the same careful attention to detail that I had always put into making sure our holidays ran smoothly. "I didn't tell them," I said suddenly, the realization hitting me. "About Grandpa's trust. I was going to, but then I saw their faces and I just couldn't give them the satisfaction." "What trust?" Zoe asked. I hadn't told anyone about this. Not even Zoe. It had felt like tempting fate somehow, like speaking it aloud might make it disappear. "My grandfather left me a trust," I explained. "Separate from my parents' estate. He set one up for each grandchild when we turned 25. Diana and Trevor received theirs years ago. I asked him to hold mine until I was ready." Zoe's eyes widened. "So all this drama, all this formal disowning?" "They can't touch that money," I confirmed. It's mine, regardless of what they do with their will. For the first time since walking into that living room, I felt a flicker of something other than devastation. Not triumph exactly, but perhaps a grim satisfaction that their plan to strip me of everything had a fatal flaw they hadn't anticipated. As night fell, I remained on Zoe's couch, unable to face my empty apartment, the space where Haley's presence lingered in shared coffee mugs and borrowed sweaters. My phone remained silent. No calls, no texts, not even from Trevor, who I'd thought might at least check if I was okay. They really think they can just erase me, I whispered, staring at the blank screen. Like I never existed. They can try, Zoe replied, setting a mug of tea in my hands. But you exist, Olivia. With or without their permission. The days after. Thanksgiving passed in a blur of numbness and sporadic tears. I called in sick to work, unable to face cheerful questions about my holiday from well-meaning colleagues. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, picking up objects and putting them down without purpose. Haley called constantly, offering to cut her trip short and come home early, but I insisted she stay with her family. One of us, at least, should have a normal holiday. On Sunday, the day I would normally be preparing for dinner at my parents' house, I sat instead on my living room floor surrounded by photo albums and family mementos. With trembling hands, I opened the oldest album, My Childhood, carefully documented in chronological order by my mother's meticulous labeling. Williams Family Vacation, 1995. There we were on a beach in Florida, Dad's arm around Diana, his obvious pride evident in his stance, Mom beside them, one hand on Trevor's shoulder, and me, standing slightly apart, holding the beach ball no one wanted to play with. Trevor's Little League Championship, 1998. The whole family in the bleachers, faces ecstatic as Trevor held up a trophy. I remembered that day clearly, how I'd missed my own art show to attend, how no one had commented when I won first prize the following week. Diana's high school graduation 2003. Dad beaming as Diana gave her valedictorian speech. Mom crying proud tears. Trevor bored but present. And me, the dutiful photographer, barely visible in the one shot someone had thought to take with me in it. Page after page, year after year, the pattern emerged with painful clarity. It had always been there, this subtle exclusion, this positioning, of me on the periphery of the family circle. In hundreds of photos, dozens of memories, I was the afterthought, the one whose accomplishments were acknowledged with polite interest rather than celebration. The one who was valued for what I gave, time, attention, support, rather than for who I was. My phone buzzed with a text. Startled, I grabbed it, a reflexive hope flaring that it might be Mom or Trevor, checking in despite everything. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize. Olivia? This is your Aunt Judith, your mother's sister. We haven't spoken in years, but I heard what happened. Can we talk? Aunt Judith. I had vague memories of her from childhood, a tall woman with Mom's eyes, and a laugh that always seemed too loud for Dad's comfort. She'd moved to Arizona when I was 10, and visits had gradually tapered off until she became a name mentioned occasionally at holidays, usually accompanied by Dad's subtle look of disapproval. I hesitated, then responded. Yes. When? My phone rang. Almost immediately. Olivia, said a warm voice when I answered. Thank you for responding. I wasn't sure you'd remember me. Of course I remember you, I said, surprised at how emotional I felt hearing her voice. It's been a long time. Too long, she agreed, and that's on me. I should have tried harder to stay in touch with you kids after your father made it clear I wasn't welcome in his home anymore. I frowned. Dad said you moved for work, that you preferred the desert. Judith's laugh held no humor. Is that what he told you? Olivia, your father cut me out of your lives when I divorced my husband and came out as gay. He said I was a bad influence, that he didn't want my lifestyle choices contaminating his children. The revelation hit me with physical force. My mother's sister, gay, excluded, erased from our family history on Dad's orders, just like me. Mom never said anything, I whispered. All these years. Elizabeth has always been conflict avoidant, Judith said, a hint of old pain in her voice. She chose your father's approval over standing up for me. I was angry for a long time, but eventually I understood. She was trapped in her own way. How did you hear about what happened? I asked. Your cousin Ryan called me. He's kept in touch over the years, despite your father's disapproval. He was at his parents' house when your mother called, hysterical after you left. Elizabeth's version was watered down, of course, but I could read between the lines. So it's a family tradition, I said bitterly. Cutting out anyone who doesn't fit Dad's perfect image. I'm afraid so, Judith confirmed. And it didn't start with me. There's your great-uncle Thomas, who was removed from all family photos after... He came out in the 70s. Your father's younger sister, Rebecca, who was disowned for marrying a black man. Your cousin Melissa, who was cut off when she chose to raise her baby as a single mother instead of marrying the father. Each revelation was like a blow, restructuring my understanding of our family history. The empty spaces in photo albums, the conspicuous absences at holidays, the names that were never spoken. These weren't random gaps, but deliberate erasures. A systematic purging of anyone who challenged my father's narrow definition of acceptable. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. All these years I thought we were this close, traditional family, when really we were just what was left after Dad excommunicated anyone who didn't conform. That's how it works, Judith said gently. The ones who remain don't speak of the uns who are cast out. It preserves the illusion that the family is intact, unified in values and beliefs. To acknowledge the missing would be to acknowledge the cruelty of the exclusion. I thought of all the family stories I'd been told. Sanitized. Versions that presented the Williams lineage as unbroken and unblemished. The carefully curated history that positioned my father as the patriarch of a respectable traditional family. Does Diana know? I asked suddenly. Or Trevor? Diana knows some of it, I think. She was older when I was cut out, old enough to understand. What was happening? Though your father would have presented it in terms she could accept. Trevor was too young. And you were just a baby when Thomas was erased, a toddler when Rebecca was disowned? By the time I was removed, your father had perfected the art of making people disappear without leaving obvious holes. I sat in stunned silence, processing this reframing of my family narrative. The Williams family wasn't the close-knit unit I'd sacrificed so much to preserve. It was a carefully maintained illusion, held together by fear, by conditional acceptance, by the silent agreement not to mention those who had been cast out. There's something else you should know, Judith continued. Something that might help you understand your mother's passivity in all this. What's that? I asked, almost afraid to hear more. Before she met your father, Elizabeth had a girlfriend. In college. Sarah, I think her name was. They were together for nearly 2 years. When our parents found out, they threatened to cut off her tuition unless she ended the relationship. She did, and within a year she was dating your father. The revelation knocked the breath from my lungs. Mom had loved a woman once, had perhaps seen herself in me, and had said nothing, done nothing, as Dad orchestrated my exclusion. I'm not telling you this to excuse her, Judith added quickly. Just to explain, Elizabeth made her choice decades ago, safety over authenticity. She's been living with the consequences ever since. As I hung up, my mind reeling with these revelations, I looked again at the photo albums spread around me. What I had interpreted as a happy traditional family was in fact the remainder after systematic pruning of any branch that grew in a direction my father disapproved of. And now, I was just the latest excised limb, joining the shadow family tree. Of the disappeared, the erased, the ones whose names were no longer spoken at the Williams family table. A week after Thanksgiving, I returned to work. The routine of the elementary school library, shelving books, helping children find adventure stories, reading aloud to kindergartners, provided a welcome distraction from the chaos of my personal life. I smiled when appropriate, answered questions about my holiday with vague pleasantries, and managed to make it through each day without breaking down. But the nights were harder. Without the structure of work, the memories flooded back. The cold calculation in my father's eyes, Diana's satisfied smirk, Trevor's cowardly avoidance, my mother's silence. The knowledge that a family I had centered my entire life around had been planning my exclusion for weeks, perhaps months. Haley had returned from Michigan, her presence a balm to my wounded spirit. She didn't push for decisions or declarations, just held me when the tears came and gave me space when I needed solitude. One evening, as we sat on the couch sharing takeout, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I nearly let it go to voicemail, not ready for another revelation or confrontation, but something made me answer. "Is this Olivia Williams?" a man's voice asked. "Yes. Who's calling?" "Harold Burke, from Burke and Associates Law Firm. I was your grandfather's attorney. I've been trying to reach you for some time, but the contact information I had was outdated. My grandfather had died 3 years ago. Why would his lawyer be calling me now? How did you get this number?" I asked cautiously. "Your Aunt Judith provided it. She said it was urgent that I speak with you directly." I sat up straighter. "What's this about, Mr. Burke?" "It's regarding your trust fund, Ms. Williams, the one your grandfather established for you when you turned 25. "Yes, I know about it. What about it?" There was a pause. "When was the last time you received a financial statement for the account?" I frowned. "I've never received statements. Grandpa told me the trust was being held until I requested it. I wasn't ready at the time, and after he died, well, I never got around to asking about it." Another pause, longer this time. "Ms. Williams, according to our records, the trust has been actively managed for the past 3 years. Regular withdrawals have been made since shortly after your grandfather's death." The room seemed to tilt. "That's not possible. I never authorized any withdrawals." "The withdrawals were authorized by the co-trustee, Marcus Williams." "Your father." "My?" Hand tightened around the phone. "How much?" I whispered. "The original amount was $175,000. The current balance is approximately $2,300. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. Over $160,000 gone. Money that my grandfather had specifically set aside for me. Money that was supposed to help me buy a house someday or start my own business. Gone. "This isn't legal," I managed, my voice shaking. "I never gave permission." "Unfortunately," Mr. Burke interrupted gently, "your father did have legal access. When your grandfather became ill, he added your father as co-trustee to help manage the account. It was meant to be a temporary arrangement until the estate was settled, but there was no formal expiration to his authority. So he just took it? And no one thought to tell me? We sent quarterly statements to the address we had on file for you, your parents' home. Of course. All my mail had gone to my parents' house until I moved out after college. I'd updated my address with everyone except my grandfather's lawyer, because I hadn't known I needed to, because no one had told me about the active management of the trust. "What about Diana and Trevor?" I asked suddenly. "Did Dad do the same with their trusts?" "I can't discuss other clients' accounts," Mr. Burke replied carefully. "But I will say that the circumstances of your siblings' trusts were different. Different. Because they had received their funds years ago when they turned 25. Because they weren't gay, weren't a threat to the Williams family image, weren't being systematically excluded from the family fortune. Can anything be done?" I asked, my mind racing. Legally speaking? That's why I'm calling. Ms. Williams, what your father did may technically have been within his legal authority as co-trustee, but it violates the spirit of the trust your grandfather established. If you're willing, I believe we have grounds to challenge these withdrawals. Your Aunt Judith suggested you might not have been aware of what was happening. Aunt Judith, she must have connected the dots after our conversation, reached out to Grandpa's lawyer directly. Another family member looking out for me when my parents had betrayed me. What would challenging the withdrawals involve? I asked. Legal proceedings? I'm afraid. You would need to file a formal complaint. There would likely be depositions, a review of financial records. It could get contentious. A polite word for what would certainly become an ugly family battle played out in legal offices, our private business exposed to lawyers and judges, the final, irrevocable severing of any remaining family ties. I need to think about it, I said. Finally, of course. Take whatever time you need. But, Ms. Williams, the sooner we act, the better chance we have of recovering some of those funds. After I hung up, I sat motionless, the magnitude of this new betrayal washing over me in waves. Not only had my father orchestrated my exclusion from the family, he had been systematically stealing from me for years, taking money that my grandfather had explicitly set aside for me, money that was meant to give me options, freedom, a future built on my own terms. Liv? Haley asked gently, her hand on my shoulder. What's wrong? You're shaking. I told her everything, the trust, the withdrawals, the legal mess that challenging them would create. As I spoke, the rage I'd been suppressing since Thanksgiving began to crystallize into something harder, colder, more resolute. They didn't just reject me, I said, my voice steadying. They've been stealing from me for years, planning my exclusion while using my own inheritance. Haley's expression hardened. That's beyond cruel. It's criminal. And deliberate, I added, pieces falling into place. The timing of this whole Thanksgiving ambush, it wasn't just about my sexuality. It was about getting me to sign those papers before I discovered the missing money. They were covering their tracks. What are you going to do? Haley asked. I stood up, suddenly energized by a clarity I hadn't felt since before Thanksgiving. First, I'm calling Mr. Burke back. Then I'm calling Aunt Judith, and then... I paused, resolution hardening in my chest. I'm going to fight. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about truth, about refusing to disappear quietly like all the other family members who had been systematically erased when they became inconvenient to my father's narrative. I had been the family peacekeeper for 28 years, sacrificing my authenticity for harmony, my dreams for proximity, my voice for acceptance. But that version of me, the compliant daughter, the silent supporter, the one who would rather be erased than make waves, had died at that Thanksgiving table. In her place stood someone new, someone who would no longer accept erasure, someone who understood, finally, that some bridges aren't meant to be preserved, they're meant to be burned, with you standing on the other side, free at last from the obligation to cross back over. December arrived, bringing with it holiday displays and cheerful music that felt jarringly at odds with my internal landscape. For the first time in my adult life, I had no family Christmas to plan, no group gifts to coordinate, no elaborate dinner to help my mother prepare. The absence should have felt liberating. Instead, it left a hollow space that echoed with questions and unresolved anger. 2 weeks after Mr. Burke's call, I sat in Zoe's apartment surrounded by documents, bank statements, trust paperwork, legal correspondence, all spread across her dining table in organized chaos. Haley sat beside me, highlighting key information. Zoe paced behind us, brainstorming aloud. So the withdrawals started small, Zoe noted, studying a timeline we'd created. 3,000 here, 5,000 there. Always with vague descriptions. like family expenses or property maintenance. Then they got bigger, Haley added. 20,000 in April last year, 35,000 in September. Right around when Trevor's band needed new equipment, I said quietly. And when Diana was between jobs, the pattern was unmistakable. My father had been using my inheritance as a family slush fund, supporting my siblings' needs and wants, while I remained completely unaware that my financial future was being systematically dismantled. Mr. Burke thinks we have a strong case, I said, tapping the legal opinion he'd sent over. Dad may have had technical authority as co-trustee, but he violated fiduciary duty by not informing me of withdrawals and by using the money for purposes that clearly weren't intended to benefit me. So what's stopping you? Zoe asked. File the complaint. Take them to court. I sighed, rubbing my temples. It's not that simple. Legal proceedings mean depositions, financial disclosures, family business made public. It would be ugly and expensive. Expensive is relative when we're talking about $160,000 that was stolen from you, Haley pointed out gently. I know, but it's not just about the money. I hesitated, struggling to articulate the conflict churning inside me. Taking this to court means a complete, permanent break with my family. No possibility of reconciliation ever. Am I ready for that? Zoe's expression softened. Liv, they organized a public disinheritance ceremony on Thanksgiving. I think they've already made the break pretty definitive. She was right, of course. But there's something about family ties, even damaged, toxic ones, that makes them difficult to sever completely. Despite everything, some small part of me still hoped for… what? An apology? Recognition? The family I had thought I had, rather than the one that actually existed? I need to be strategic, I said finally. Not reactive. I can't make this decision out of anger or hurt. I need to be clear about what I want and what I'm willing to sacrifice to get it. That night, alone in my apartment, I took out a notebook and began to write. Not the frantic emotional journaling of the days immediately after Thanksgiving, but a measured assessment of my situation and options. What do I know? My family has systematically excluded me because of my sexuality. My father has been taking money from my trust for at least 3 years. There's a history of family members being erased when they don't conform. Legal action would likely recover some money but burn all bridges permanently. What do I want? Financial justice, recovery of what was taken from me. Recognition of the wrong done to me. Freedom from the toxic family dynamic closure that allows me to move forward. What am I willing to sacrifice? The possibility of reconciliation, the comfortable. Fiction of the family I thought I had. The approval I've spent my life seeking. The last question was the hardest. What would make me feel whole again? Not money, though it would help secure my future. Not revenge, though the thought of my father facing consequences held a certain bitter satisfaction. Not even an apology, which would likely be hollow if it came at all. What would make me whole was the truth. Acknowledgement of what had been done, not just to me, but to all the family members who had been erased before me. An end to the lies, the silence, the careful curation of family history that had allowed my father to maintain his control for decades. The next morning, I called Aunt Judith. I've been thinking about what to do, I told her. About the trust, about everything. And, she asked, I want to know more about the others. Thomas, Rebecca, Melissa, all the ones who were cut out before me. Do you have contact information? For any of them? Some, Judith replied. Rebecca and I have stayed in touch. Thomas passed away about 10 years ago, but his partner David is still alive. Melissa moved to Oregon, has 2 kids now. Why? I'm putting together a family history, I said. The real one, not the sanitized version my father created. Before I decide what to do legally, I want to understand the full pattern of what happened. That's not what I expected, Judith admitted, but I think it's a powerful approach. Documenting the truth is its own form of justice. Over the next week, I reached out to these shadow relatives, these people who shared my blood but had been removed from the official family narrative. Rebecca, my father's sister, now in her 60s with silver hair and my father's eyes, who cried when we spoke on video call. David, who shared stories of Thomas's humor and gentle spirit, and how deeply he had been hurt by his family's rejection. Melissa, whose teenage sons had never met their great-uncle Marcus despite living just 3 hours away. Each conversation filled in pieces of the puzzle, revealing a clearer picture of the man who had ruled our family with conditional love and strategic exclusion. The pattern was consistent. Anyone who threatened my father's carefully constructed image of respectability was systematically removed, their existence minimized, their names unspoken at family gatherings. Armed with these stories, I met with Mr. Burke again, this time with a clearer sense of purpose. I want to pursue legal action, I told him, but not just for the money. I want the process to document the pattern of behavior. I wanted on record what was done to me and to others before me. Mr. Burke nodded thoughtfully. That changes our approach somewhat. Instead of just focusing on the financial aspect, we'll need to establish the broader context of your father's actions. It will make the case more complex, but potentially stronger. What happens next? I asked. We file a formal complaint. Your father will be served legal papers. There will be a discovery phase where both sides share evidence and documentation, potentially depositions where family members testify under oath. It won't be quick, and it certainly won't be pleasant. And my mother? Will she be involved? Mr. Burke's expression softened slightly. As your father's spouse and potentially a beneficiary of the misappropriated funds, yes, she would likely be deposed as well. The thought of my mother being forced to testify, to choose sides publicly, gave me pause. Despite her complicity in my exclusion, I couldn't help remembering what Aunt Judith had told me about her own history, her choice of safety over authenticity decades ago. Is there any way to protect her? I asked. To focus this on my father's actions? That depends on how involved she was in the financial decisions. If she was a knowing participant in the misuse of your trust, it would be difficult to shield her completely. I nodded, absorbing this reality. The path forward was becoming clearer, but no less difficult. This wasn't just about reclaiming what had been taken from me financially. It was about reclaiming the truth of my family history, breaking the cycle of erasure that had silenced so many before me. That night, I made a decision. Before taking legal action, before triggering the cascade of consequences that would follow, I would give my family one chance, not for reconciliation, but for honesty. One opportunity to acknowledge what they had done and make amends without the force of legal proceedings. Not because they deserved it, but because I needed to know I had tried everything before burning the last bridge. On a cold Saturday morning in mid-December, I drove to my parents' house, a letter sealed in an envelope on the passenger seat beside me. The neighborhood was festively decorated, wreaths on doors, lights strung along eaves, inflatable snowmen, bobbing in front yards. My parents' house stood among them, its holiday display as meticulously perfect as always. The symmetrical garlands along the porch railing, the coordinated red and gold ornaments on the small trees flanking the front door, all evidence of my mother's careful attention to aesthetic detail. I hadn't called ahead. I knew if I did, my father would refuse to see me or would prepare some defense, some way to control the narrative before I could speak. The element of surprise was my only advantage. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. The house looked exactly as it always had, the place where I'd grown up, where I'd spent countless family dinners, where I'd shaped my identity around being the good daughter, the peacekeeper, the one who put family first. It was strange how something could look so familiar and yet feel so alien at the same time. With a deep breath, I took the envelope and walked to the front door. I rang the bell instead of using my key, a clear signal that I no longer considered myself entitled to enter without invitation. My mother answered, her expression shifting rapidly from confusion to shock to a strange mixture of relief and fear. "Olivia," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" "I need to speak with you and Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Is he home?" She nodded, stepping back to let me in. "In his office. I'll get him." The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, just as it had on Thanksgiving. Christmas decorations filled every surface. The collection of nutcrackers on the mantel, the ceramic village on the sideboard, the formal tree in the living room with its color-coordinated ornaments. I had helped set up these displays every year since I was tall enough to reach the shelves. I remained standing in the foyer, deliberately not making myself comfortable, not sliding back into the role of daughter in this home. I was a visitor, now. A stakeholder in a difficult conversation. My father appeared from his office, his face hardening when he saw me. "Olivia, this is unexpected." "I know. I apologize for coming unannounced, but I thought it was important that we speak in person." "If this is about Thanksgiving," he began, his tone already dismissive. "It's about much more than Thanksgiving," I interrupted, something I rarely did with my father. "It's about my trust fund, the one Grandpa set up for me. The one you've been systematically emptying for the past 3 years. The color drained from his face. Behind him, my mother made a small, distressed sound. "Who told you?" he started, then caught himself. "That's a complicated financial matter you don't fully understand." "Actually, I understand it perfectly. Mr. Burke, Grandpa's lawyer, has explained everything in detail. The account had $175,000 when Grandpa died. It now has just over $12,000. You made 27 separate withdrawals, none of which were authorized by me or made for my benefit." My father's expression shifted from shock to calculation. I could almost see him running through potential explanations, justifications, ways to maintain control of the situation. "Those funds were used for family expenses," he said finally. "As head of this family, I made decisions about resource allocation that benefited everyone. Except they didn't benefit me," I replied. "And they were specifically designated for me by Grandpa. It was theft, Dad, plain and simple." "How dare you?" he began, voice rising. I held up a hand. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to set boundaries and make my position clear." I handed him the sealed envelope. "This letter outlines 2 options. Option 1. You return the misappropriated funds within 90 days. Not all at once if that's not possible, but according to the repayment schedule included. You acknowledge in writing what you did, and you agree to have no further control over any financial assets that rightfully belong to me." My father's jaw tightened as he gripped the envelope without opening it. "And option 2? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I file a formal legal complaint. The trust mismanagement gets investigated. Financial records are subpoenaed. Depositions are taken under oath. The whole family history, not just the theft, but the pattern of exclusion going back decades, becomes part of the public record." "You wouldn't," he said, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "I've already spoken to Thomas's partner, and Rebecca, and Melissa. I know about all the family members you've erased over the years when they didn't conform to your narrow definition of acceptable. They're willing to testify about the pattern." My mother gasped softly. These were names that hadn't been spoken in our house for years, ghosts my father had banished from our family narrative. "You've been busy," my father said coldly. "I've been learning the truth," I corrected. "About our family, about who you really are." "And you think airing family business in court is the solution? Bringing shame on this family name?" "I think accountability is the solution," I replied. "The shame isn't in the truth being known. It's in what you did." My father's face flushed with anger. This is extortion. No, it's a boundary. For the first time in my life, I'm telling you clearly what I will and won't accept. What happens next is your choice. I turned to my mother, who had been silent throughout this exchange, her hands twisted together in distress. Mom, I'm not asking you to choose sides. I understand the position you're in, but I want you to know that whatever happens next, it's not because I didn't try to resolve this privately. Olivia, please, she whispered. Can't we just talk about this? As a family? We stopped being a family the moment Dad decided I was expendable, I said gently. Maybe we never really were the family I thought we were. I moved toward the door, then paused. You have 30 days to decide which option you're taking. After that, my lawyer will proceed with the complaint. And your siblings? My father asked. Have you told them about this crusade of yours? I shook my head. Not yet, but I will. They deserve to know where their extra money has been coming from all these years. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange lightness despite the gravity of what had just happened. For the first time in my life, I had confronted my father as an equal, not as the compliant daughter desperate for his approval. I had named his actions clearly, without minimizing or excusing them. I had set boundaries rather than abandoning my own needs to keep the peace. The old Olivia would have been terrified of his anger, devastated by the confrontation, consumed with guilt for disrupting the family harmony. The new Olivia felt only clarity and a quiet resolve. Whether he chose to make amends or to fight, I would no longer be defined by his acceptance or controlled by the fear of his rejection. I had spoken my truth. I had reclaimed my voice. Whatever came next, I would face it standing firmly in the knowledge of my own worth, a worth that had never depended on his recognition, despite all the years I had spent believing it did. The first response came just hours after I left my parents' house. My phone exploded with texts from Diana, a rapid-fire barrage of accusations and outrage. How dare you threaten Dad with legal action? After everything they've done for you, you have no idea the stress you're causing, Mom. This family supported you your entire life, and this is how you repay them? With extortion? I read the messages without responding, noting how quickly my father had mobilized his most loyal soldier. Diana had always been his enforcer, the one who carried out his will through persuasion or intimidation, depending on what the situation required. Her messages followed a familiar pattern: guilt, obligation, family loyalty, the same emotional weapons that had been used against me my entire life. When the texts received no response, my phone rang. Diana. I let it go to voicemail. Olivia, this is absolutely ridiculous. Her voice snippered through the speaker when I played the message later. Dad told me about your little visit and your outrageous demands. If you had financial problems, you could have just asked for help. Instead of inventing these wild accusations, call me back immediately so we can discuss how to fix the mess you've created. Fix the mess I'd created, not the mess Dad had created by systematically stealing from me. Not the mess they'd all created with their Thanksgiving ambush. In Diana's world, in the Williams family narrative, any disruption to the established order was always the fault of the person who named the problem, never the ones who caused it. I didn't call her back. Trevor was next, his approach more subtle, but no less manipulative. His text arrived the following morning. Hey, Liv, can we grab coffee? Just you and me. Like old times. Old times. When I'd listened to his problems, supported his dreams, kept his secrets, all while he kept the most significant relationship in his life hidden from me for months. When I'd believed we were close while he participated in planning my exclusion from the family. Still, of all my family members, Trevor was the one I most believed might be capable of growth, of seeing beyond my father's rigid worldview. I agreed to meet him at a cafe downtown, neutral territory where neither of us would have the home field advantage. He was waiting when I arrived. 2 coffees all ready on the table, mine prepared exactly as I liked it, a peace offering in caffeinated form. "You look good," he said as I sat down, a note of surprise in his voice. "Did you expect me to fall apart?" I asked, not unkindly. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I've been worried about you. After Thanksgiving, well, it was ugly. I wanted to reach out, but Dad said we should give you space." "Dad said?" I repeated. "And you always do what Dad says, don't you?" Trevor flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You knew about Thanksgiving in advance. You knew I was being set up for a public humiliation. You sat there and said nothing while I was ambushed." "I didn't know it would happen like that," he protested. "Dad just said there would be a family discussion about your situation." "My situation," I echoed. "You mean the fact that I'm gay? That I've been in a loving relationship with Haley for 2 years while pretending she was my roommate because I knew exactly how the family would react?" "I wouldn't have cared," Trevor said quietly, "about you being gay, if you'd told me." The statement hung between us, a mixture of truth and convenient revision. Perhaps he wouldn't have cared. Trevor had always been the most progressive member of our family, at least in theory. But he had still participated in my exclusion, had still kept secrets from me while demanding complete transparency from me. Why? "Are we really here, Trevor?" I asked, suddenly tired of the dance. He sighed, running a hand through his hair in the gesture so familiar from our childhood. "Dad's freaking out about this legal thing. He says you're threatening to drag the family through the mud, expose private matters in court. I'm threatening to hold him accountable for stealing over $160,000 from me," I corrected. "The trust Grandpa set up specifically for me. Money that apparently went to things like your band equipment and Diana's condo down payment." Trevor's eyes widened. "What? No, that's not... We didn't know..." "You didn't ask where the money was coming from?" I pressed. "When Dad suddenly had thousands of dollars to invest in your music career right when you needed it most?" His silence was answer enough. "I don't blame you," I said, softening slightly. "I don't think you knew he was taking it from my trust. But I do hold you accountable for participating in cutting me out of the family. For keeping Vanessa a secret from me for months while I told you everything about my life. For sitting silent at that Thanksgiving table while Dad tried to erase me." Trevor stared at his coffee, unable to meet my eyes. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "Dad's not going to back down. You know how he is. This will tear the family apart." "The family is already torn apart," I said gently. "It has been for generations. Every time someone failed to meet Dad's standards of acceptable, they were cut out, erased, their names unspoken. Great Uncle Thomas, Aunt Rebecca, Cousin Melissa, now me. It's a pattern, Trevor, and it only continues because everyone left in the inner circle pretends not to see it." "So this isn't just about the money," he said slowly. "The money matters," I acknowledged. "It was meant for my future. But no, this isn't just about the money. It's about breaking the cycle, about refusing to be erased, about standing up to Dad's manipulation for the first time in our lives." "He'll never admit he was wrong," Trevor warned. "He'll fight this to the bitter end. That's his choice. I've given him another option. Make amends privately, return what he took, acknowledge what he did. No courts, no public exposure. And if he doesn't, then I proceed with the legal action, not out of vengeance, but because I deserve justice. And because the truth deserves to be spoken after decades of silence." Trevor was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. "What about Mom? This will destroy her." It was the question I'd been wrestling with myself. My mother, trapped in a marriage to a controlling man who had once loved a woman herself and been forced to choose between that love and her family's support, who had remained silent when her own sister was cut out of her life, who had watched, Year after year, as family members disappeared from photos and conversations when they failed to conform. Mom made her choice a long time ago, I said finally. She chose Dad's approval over authenticity. She chose silence over standing up for what's right. I feel for her, I do. But I can't set myself on fire to keep her warm anymore. Trevor nodded. Slowly. I understand. I don't like it, but I understand. As we parted outside the cafe, he hesitated, then pulled me into an awkward hug. For what it's worth, I miss you. Sunday dinners aren't the same without you there. I miss the brother I thought I had, I replied honestly. Maybe someday we can build something real, something based on truth. But right now, I need to focus on healing. Walking away, I felt the weight of his gaze on my back. Trevor stood at a crossroads. Continue as my father's loyal son, preserving his place in the family at the cost of perpetuating the cycle, or break away, risking his own position to stand for what was right. His choice wasn't mine to make. But for the first time in my life, I was making my own choices without considering what my family would think, without agonizing over their approval. And in that independence, painful as the circumstances were, I had found a freedom I'd never known was possible. Christmas came and went without a word from my parents. I spent the holiday with Haley at her family's home in Michigan, where I was welcomed with genuine warmth and acceptance. Her parents made space for me at their table, included me in family traditions, and never once made me feel like an outsider. It was both healing and heartbreaking to experience what family could be when love wasn't conditional. The 30-day deadline I'd given my father passed in early January with no response to my letter. No repayment plan. No acknowledgement of the theft. Not even a rejection of my terms. Just silence, the same weapon he'd used against other family members who had challenged him over the years. What now? Haley asked as we sat at our kitchen table, sharing morning coffee before work. Now we proceed with the legal complaint, I replied, surprised by my own calm. Mr. Burke has everything prepared. The process moved more quickly than I'd expected. Papers were filed. A court date was set for initial proceedings. My father was formally served legal documents at his office, a deliberate choice on my part, a small revenge for the public humiliation he had orchestrated for me on Thanksgiving. Diana's response was immediate and vicious. A lengthy email detailing my failings as a daughter, my selfishness, my ingratitude. I read it once, then filed it away as evidence of the family dynamic I was fighting to escape. I didn't respond. Trevor's reaction was more measured, a text expressing disappointment, but not surprise. Dad refused to even discuss your offer. Said he wouldn't be blackmailed. I tried, Liv. I believed him. Trevor had always existed in the uncomfortable middle ground, trying to maintain his place in the family while preserving some semblance of independence. I thanked him for trying and left it at that. From my mother there was only silence, which spoke volumes about the impossible position she found herself in, caught between her husband's rigid control and her daughter's justified demand for accountability. The legal proceedings began. I found myself making other changes, practical steps to fully separate my life from the family that had rejected me. I changed my emergency contact at work from my mother to Haley. I removed my parents from my healthcare proxy and gave that authority to Zoe instead. I updated my own will, leaving my modest assets to Haley and to a scholarship fund for LGBTQ+ students at the elementary school where I worked. These were small acts, administrative details most people wouldn't think twice about. But for me, they were profound breaks from a lifetime of organizing my existence around family obligation. Each form I signed, each document I updated, was another thread cut from the web that had kept me bound to toxic patterns and conditional love. The most significant change came in February, when Haley and I began discussing living arrangements. Her apartment lease was ending in April, and we'd been talking casually about moving in together someday. What if someday was now? she asked one evening as we walked through the park near my apartment. What if we found a place that was ours from the beginning, not yours that I moved into, or mine that you joined? The old Olivia would have hesitated, calculating how my family would react, whether they would see this as further evidence of my lifestyle choices, how it might affect any potential reconciliation. The new Olivia simply smiled and squeezed her hand. I'd like that, I said. A fresh start in a place that's ours. We found a small house for rent in a neighborhood halfway between my school and her hospital. It had a garden in the back where we could grow vegetables and flowers, a spare room we could use as a shared office, and a kitchen with enough counter space for Haley's ambitious cooking projects. Most importantly, it had no history, no associations, no ghosts of family approval or disapproval haunting its corners. As we signed the lease, I felt a sense of building something new, a life defined by choice rather than obligation, by authentic connection rather than performative harmony. A life where family wasn't determined solely by blood, but by genuine care and mutual respect. The legal case continued its slow progress through preliminary motions and initial hearings. My father hired an expensive attorney who filed motions to dismiss, argued technical points, and employed every strategy possible to delay and complicate the proceedings. I had expected nothing less, but with each passing week, his power over me diminished. The fear of his disapproval, which had shaped so many of my choices for so long, faded like an old photograph left in the sun. The desperate need for his acceptance, which had driven me to sacrifice my authenticity year after year, loosened its grip on my heart. I was building a life defined not by what I had lost, but by what I was creating. Not by who had rejected me, but by who had chosen to love me as I truly was. Spring arrived with a gentle persistence, coaxing green from the cold earth and bringing color back to a landscape that had been dominated by winter's gray palette. In our new home, Haley and I established routines that felt both novel and natural. Morning coffee in the sunroom, weekend trips to the farmer's market, evenings spent planning our garden. My legal case against my father continued its methodical progress through the court system. The initial hearing had gone in my favor, with the judge denying my father's motion to dismiss and ordering the discovery phase to begin. This meant financial records would be exchanged, depositions scheduled, the machinery of justice grinding, slowly but inexorably forward. What I hadn't anticipated was how public the case would become in our community. Ridgemont was a small city, and the Williams family had deep roots there. My father was well known through his insurance business, my mother through her garden club and charity work. News of the lawsuit spread quickly, transforming me overnight from the quiet librarian to the subject of whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Some reactions were predictable. My father's friends and business associates avoided me in public. Church members who had known me since childhood suddenly found reasons to cross the street rather than greet me. Others were surprising. Notes of support slipped into my mailbox at work. Quiet words of encouragement from unexpected allies. Even a few former classmates reaching out to share their own stories of family rejection. The most unexpected support came from my Aunt Rebecca, who called one evening in late March. "I'm coming to town next weekend," she announced without preamble. "For your deposition, I want to be there." "You don't have to do that," I said, touched by the offer. "It's going to be uncomfortable." "I know exactly how uncomfortable it will be," she replied with a dry laugh. "I faced your father across a conference table 30 years ago when he tried to contest our grandmother's bequest to me. He doesn't intimidate me anymore, and I want to make sure he doesn't intimidate you." Having Rebecca there, this aunt I'd only recently discovered, who shared my father's strong jawline but none of his coldness, gave me courage I hadn't known I needed. She sat behind me during the 6-hour deposition, a silent witness as my father's attorney tried to paint me as ungrateful, unstable, vindictive. When the questioning became particularly aggressive, I would feel her presence like a shield at my back, reminding me that I wasn't alone, that others had faced this battle before me and survived. "You did beautifully," she told me afterward, as we shared dinner at a small restaurant far from the country club where my parents socialized. "You stayed focused on the facts. You didn't let them bait you into emotional reactions." "I kept thinking about what you told me," I admitted. "About how he tried to erase you from the family but couldn't erase the strength you got from Grandma." "Sullivan," Rebecca smiled, the expression transforming her face from its usual serious set to something luminous. "The Williams men have always underestimated the women in this family. Your grandfather did it to your grandmother. Your father did it to me, to your mother, and now to you. And to Aunt Judith," I added. "And Cousin Melissa." "A long line of women who refuse to be convenient," Rebecca agreed, raising her glass, in a toast. "Welcome to the club." That night, as Haley and I prepared for bed, I found myself studying my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was the same one I'd seen all my life, but something in the eyes had changed. The perpetual anxiety, the constant vigilance, the need to monitor myself for any sign of behavior that might upset the family balance. It was gone, replaced by a steady gaze that recognized its own worth. "You're different," Haley observed, coming up behind me and wrapping her arms around my waist. "Since this all started, stronger." "Not stronger," I corrected, leaning back against her. "Just more myself. Like I've been carrying this weight for so long I didn't even notice it anymore. And now it's gone." The weightlifting extended beyond my relationship with my family. At work, I found myself speaking up more in staff meetings, suggesting innovations for the library that I would have previously kept to myself for fear of seeming pushy. With friends, I expressed opinions without first calculating whether they might cause disagreement, shared stories without editing out details that might seem controversial. Even my relationship with Haley deepened as I stopped compartmentalizing. My life stopped maintaining the mental divisions between family-safe topics and authentic experiences. For the first time, I was fully present with her, fully integrated, not holding part of myself in reserve for the exhausting work of maintaining family peace. "I've been thinking about the future," I told her one evening as we worked in our small garden, planting tomato seedlings in neat rows. "About what I want, regardless of how this legal case turns out." "And what do you want?" she asked, brushing soil from her hands. "To build something real," I said. "A life based on truth, not performance. Relationships where I don't have to earn belonging through self-erasure. Work that matters to me, not just to others." "That sounds like a good foundation," Haley said, her smile warming me more than the spring sunshine. "Much better than secrets and fear." I nodded, pressing soil around a fragile seedling. "Like this garden, like this relationship, like my own sense of self. Something new was growing. Something honest and strong, nurtured by truth and tended with care. The money still mattered. The legal case still mattered. But more important was this transformation, from a woman defined by others' expectations to one guided by her own inner compass, from someone desperate for approval to someone centered in her own worth. 1 year. After the Thanksgiving that shattered my world, I sat in a courthouse conference room with Mr. Burke beside me, watching my father sign the settlement agreement. His hand was steady, his face impassive, giving away nothing of what this moment cost him, not financially, but in pride. The terms were straightforward: repayment of $150,000 over 5 years, acknowledgement of improper use of the trust funds, and a non-disclosure agreement that would keep the details private while allowing me to speak my truth about what had happened. It was less than what he had taken, but enough to close this chapter of my life without the continued stress of litigation. Diana hadn't spoken to me since the settlement terms were announced. Trevor had sent a brief text. "Glad it's over. Maybe someday we can talk again." My mother had called once, her voice small and hesitant, asking if I was okay. I told her I was better than okay. I was free. As we left the courthouse, Rebecca waiting outside to drive me home, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a profound sense of closure. The money would help secure my future. A down payment on a house someday, perhaps graduate school, investments for retirement. But the true value of this year-long battle had been in what it taught me about myself, about family, about the difference between love and control. That evening, Haley and I hosted a small gathering at our home. Rebecca and her husband, Aunt Judith, who had flown in for the settlement, cousin Melissa and her teenage sons, Zoe and her new boyfriend David, who had been Uncle Thomas's partner for 40 years before his death. A collection of people connected not just by blood or marriage, but by choice and mutual respect. As we shared a meal in our small dining room, I looked around at these faces, some newly discovered family, some chosen family, and recognized a truth that had been obscured for most of my life. Family isn't defined by unconditional acceptance of mistreatment. It's defined by unconditional respect for each other's humanity. My father had believed that family meant obedience to his vision, conformity to his values, silence about his flaws. He had cultivated an image of the perfect family by systematically removing anyone who challenged that image, creating a curated version of reality where his word was law and his approval was the currency we all traded in. But here at this table was a different vision, a family built not on control but on connection, not on performance but on authenticity, not on fear but on mutual care. These people had come together not because they were obligated by blood, but because they had chosen to create bonds of love and respect across the divisions my father had tried to enforce. I had lost the family I thought I had, but found the one I truly needed. A constellation of relationships where I could exist completely as myself, where my worth wasn't measured by compliance, where my voice was valued rather than silenced. The secret I had revealed that Thanksgiving Day had cost me my place in my father's carefully constructed family narrative. But it had given me something far more precious, the freedom to write my own story, on my own terms, surrounded by people who loved me not despite who I was, but because of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.